and the public spaces don't cater for their needs. And then, for example, also there are a lot of new mobility modes that don't cater for women's needs, because we do have a different use of mobility services. And what does that look like in detail? So if we look at the statistics, women still do most of the unpaid care work, and that's across all countries with varying percentages. Women are more likely to travel encumbered, so they're more likely to travel with small children. They're looking after elderly relatives. They're doing the grocery shopping. So, so there's already a different aspect of how they travel. They're often poorer. Hello, gender pay gap. They're more likely to work part-time. They're kind of connected as well, the how much money you earn and do you work full-time or part-time. And they often don't have a straightforward commute. So unlike how we built our cities were built quite often to this 1950s traditional family model, where the family lives in the suburbs and the husband commutes to work, and the woman stays at home and looks after the children. And then the husband commutes back from the workplace to the home. But that is not women's reality, and that's not our reality anymore, really. Society is changing. The way we live our lives is changing. So we really need to look at how do these cities, not just the mobility modes, but how do cities sort of cater for these new forms of family and living that we have, where the commute isn't straightforward anymore, where we have to bring the children to school, do the shopping, look after our auntie, take her to the doctor and get to work, or maybe work from home and do all these things. So you can see our commute is not a straight A to B anymore, but it's a zigzag. It's quite different. Then we obviously, and we have to talk about this, women experience harassment and assault in the public space, and that includes transport as well. And my last sentence here got cut off in the slides. There's one more issue in transport that women experience, the so-called pink tax in transport as well. And the pink tax is basically a gender-based tax where women get charged more for the same products or services compared to men, just because it's women. And in transport, the pink tax sort of reflects itself in women ending up paying more for transport because they need to fall back on safer transport options. So, for example, at night, they will be more likely to hail a taxi because it feels safer than using public transport. But it's also a lot more expensive. So if you look up pink tax, New York, I think it was Sarah Kaufman. She did a study with a lot of other researchers on that, and in New York, women pay quite a lot more for transport compared to men using transport. So then we've also got sort of accessibility issues. If you look at this situation here, it's very common in the UK that you've got really inaccessible train carriages, and that is a problem a lot more for women because, as we heard before, quite a lot more they travel encumbered, or they've got, I mean, any parent would struggle with this if you've got, two small children with you, or a pram, or you're grocery shopping, or an elderly relative that you're trying to get from A to B. This is a situation that would make your trip really difficult. And then we look at other transport situations, the London Tube here. This is if it's really, really crowded, it can create situations that feel unsafe in terms of harassment. But also if you, for example, again, if you're traveling with your children, this will be quite stressful. And then the other extreme, if it's completely empty, then there is a lack of safety as well. So we've got a lot of safety issues we really need to look at when we try to create mobility systems that cater for women. And yeah, as I mentioned, if you're alone in the public space, that is a big problem that we need to look at continuously. And that obviously also concerns public transport, but also, and nobody's really talking about this, and I find that really, really frustrating. If we look at autonomous vehicles, I'm a big fan of autonomous shuttles and autonomous DRT, so demand responsive transport, because I think it can really help bring people together in rural areas, really improve the transport in rural areas, specifically in suburban areas. It can make public transport more nimble. It can help with paratransit or transport for people with medical needs. It's just a more flexible way of providing a transport service, especially in areas where using a big bus is not economical, or where using a train is not economical. But nobody really seems to consider what happens if there's no driver, if there's no conductor, if there's no one, no supervising person in that shuttle. And yeah, there might be a camera, there might be an emergency button, but would you really still feel safe as a woman? I see that as a big problem, and nobody's addressing it. And I find that really frustrating. So when we talk about autonomous shuttles and gender, we really need to talk about safety for women. It's really, really important. But also, if you look in a bit more detail at this picture, you see that the step into the shuttle is really, really high. And I've learned the reason that autonomous electric shuttles have high steps to get in is because the batteries are in the floor, because that's just the way they were designed. But that also makes them really inaccessible, because you're completely relying on a ramp to magically appear so that you can get your pram in, or you can exit with your small children, or if you have a disability. So again, we're creating these new transport modes. We can't really just blame it all on the old systems and say, oh, it's all old infrastructure. We're creating new modes where, again, we're not looking in detail at the different user groups that are going to use these transport modes that are otherwise really amazing. We just have to really focus on diversifying our own impression of who's using this. And this is another example. Charging stations, are they in places that are well lit? Are they in places where there's foot traffic or general traffic? Would you feel safe at night? Charging your car there is another aspect. Also, these are not wheelchair friendly. And scooters, I mean, that's something that Nathan is going to talk about. Scooters, usage of scooters can be quite difficult for women for various aspects, and I won't take away from Nathan's presentation on the gender equity report. So we'll talk about that a bit later. But again, so placement of scooters, can I use them with high heels? Where do I put my handbag? Where can I drop it off? Is that safe? How do I even use it? So again, women have different behavior here that we really need to look at. And it's obviously not all bad. So there are also a lot of really great things happening in this space. So one example I always like to highlight is Vienna. Vienna has a gender mainstreaming department in the city council, I guess, and they look at gender and inclusion in all areas of city life: public spaces, public transport, the whole built environment, technologies, transport modes. So it's really embedded. And I think that's one of the reasons why Vienna always comes out on top in those quality of life rankings of cities that you see. Vienna is usually quite high, because what happens when you consider gender, you really make your environment more accessible and more user-friendly for anyone, because it's safer for everyone, it's more accessible for everyone, and it's more usable, and you get people out of their cars. You've got here in the UK, there's an app called Safe in the City that helps women move around in a way that is potentially safer. At SketGo, we do a lot of work when it comes to accessibility routing, so getting people with reduced mobility from A to B. but also we're looking at safety routing. So we're starting to look at data of street lighting, for example. You can get data, I mean, it's tricky, it always depends on the data that you can receive, but if you can get data on the general safety of areas, you could integrate that into your routing. So these are all the things that we look at as a tech provider to offer that to our clients, which are businesses and also governments and city councils who are starting to be a bit more interested in this topic. And then we have, again, as I mentioned before, the Voind Women in Transport Gender Equity Report, where the private sector is really starting to realize, hang on, we really need to make sure that nobody gets left behind and that we're being inclusive, and they're doing some really great work on this topic. So what we're really trying to achieve is create an accessible and safe mobility ecosystem for everyone. Because as I said, if we include gender, we are making sure that we don't leave people behind. And if we consider gender, we also automatically consider accessibility. We consider safety. We consider just making our whole mobility ecosystem more user-friendly, which at the end of the day means people don't have to rely on their cars, but they may be more likely to choose other modes of transport, shared modes, public modes, because it's easier and it's safer. And we have to do that. And as a private, as someone who comes from the private sector, I have to say it, we need regulation for this. We need the top-down pressure. I think that's really, really important. We need funding and financial encouragement, and we need to keep talking to advocacy groups and that's one of the reasons why we started the Women in Mobility UK, for example. So this environment of raising awareness, what I'm doing now, encouragement, but also pressure. We're really hoping that will have an impact on the whole mobility ecosystem and make it more user-friendly. Because at the end of the day, what we're doing at the moment, this sort of one size fits all, it's just not good enough anymore. And if we want to get people out of their cars and leave their own cars at home, not even buy a car anymore, we have to make sure our mobility systems cater for everyone. And there's a lot, so this is, I'm coming to the end of my presentation. There's a lot that really everyone can do if you work in the mobility sector. Please do consider and prioritize gender, but also accessibility in all aspects of what you do, because there will always be an aspect that is relevant. Consult with experts or just follow them on social media. Twitter and LinkedIn are full of really amazing people who share their experiences and their learnings and their research. So stay up to date with research. It's really easy now to get access to the data as well, and challenge your thinking. Ask yourself, who's not in the room right now? What would their questions be? What would their problems be? What would their challenges be that we need to address? And if you can, create a team of advisors and contribute. Join a networking group like the Women in Mobility UK or the Women in Mobility in Germany. Join a networking group and really learn, because we can all contribute to this. We can all make the system better. And just to finalize, I'm happy to share this slide deck at the end if you like, but you can also just take a screenshot of this. There's some really great resources if you want to really dive into the data on this topic. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, let me know in the chat.
Thank you, Sandra, for your great keynote, and some of our listeners already are looking for the presentation slide deck from you, and they can contact you. Sharing this thank you, sharing these comprehensive insights. I'm sure many of us have had some ideas on her introduction to inclusive mobility through a gender lens. These are main aspects of our mobility needs and desire for the inclusive mobility. Although there started a discussion in the chat, I guess it is now a perfect time to integrate Lena Rickenberg, Nathan Ashley, and Dr. Petra Naas in our discussion. Yeah, thank you. And but before we start with our panel talk, I'd like to introduce them to all of you. Lena Rickenberg studied political management at the NRW School of Governance in Duisburg, spent several years in Berlin's social startup scene, and now heads the Move Mobility project at the Berliner think tank iRights.lab with a team of 10 people. Move Mobility is the accompanying research for the M Fund, a major research and development initiative of the German Federal Ministry for Digital and Transport for Data-Driven Mobility, with now 400 projects and 1,200 partners. On the associated EMET platform, the Move Mobility team reports on trends and good practices in data-driven mobility and connects mobility experts with each other. The EMET Women for Data-Driven Mobility Network aims to increase the visibility of women from the M Fund and networking among them. And Nathan Ashley is a strategy policy manager covering the policy areas of safety and equity for VOI technology, VOI technology, Europe's fastest growing micromobility provider. Before joining VOI, Nathan briefed the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, in preparation for mayor's question time, people's question time, and other scrutiny sessions. Nathan has also worked for Transport for London, TfL, as a city planner, specializing in several policy areas where he helped to inform, develop, and contribute to the mayor's transport strategy, the environment strategy, and the creation of the expanded ultra-low emission zone, ULEZ. And Dr. Petra Naz holds a PhD degree in physics, astrophysics, and started her career with a European Science Organization. She has a passion for science, education, and the environment that she wants to share. She is the founder of Women in Charge by 2014, an initiative to promote electric mobility while creating awareness of environmental issues. She is also the founder and CEO of the Little Shop of Science, established in 2012, a private educational center aimed at teaching science, math, languages, and promoting general science to a broader audience. And dear audience, at this point, I'd like to give a general note again and invite you all to share with us your questions about the keynote or around our theme today, inclusive mobility through a gender lens. You can send questions at the Q&A section of this meeting room. Later, I'll pick up some questions or discuss among our panelists. Please do not wait until the end of the panel to send your questions. You can do it anytime starting from now. Now, let's start our panel with you, Lena, Nathan, and Petra, and come to the first talking point. In the keynotes, we learned the need for inclusive mobility through a gender lens. These are mainly aspects of our mobility needs and desire from inclusive mobility, but perhaps we can continue with a bit of an overview of other aspects, such as the gender data gap, the need for women networks in the mobility sector, the female-friendly infrastructure and cities, shared scooters and gender equity, improving female ridership, gender analysis toolkit for transport, and some lessons learned for women, men, and electric mobility, charging infrastructure, and gender bias, etc., and many more. So Lena, Nathan, and Petra, the first question I would like to address to you first. After that, we would also like to hear the views by Sandra, of course, all our representatives of global companies, organizations, and consultancy businesses being the executives. From your experience, how can we see inclusive mobility? Lena, what is the gender data gap and what's the problem about it? And I will also ask to Nathan, micromobility is the first new form of transport to be introduced to the streets in over 100 years. So by standards, still relatively new, the challenge for the transport sector and governments now is translating the perspectives of women into action at the local and national level in the short time. VOI has been around, and Nathan, the question to you will be, what actions have you taken to address gender equity issues in transport, specifically micromobility? And then Petra would like to answer a bit about women in charge, women, men, and electric mobility, and the lessons learned from your project since 2014, Petra. And then I will ask Sandra, as it looks like still we have a long road to go in regards to inclusive mobility. Why has there been so little progress over the past decades, Sandra? But now Maybe we can start with you, Lena. What is the gender data gap? And what is the problem about it? Please, Lena.
Yeah, hi from my side as well. Before I start, maybe we want to stop the presentation mode so we can see our pictures a little bigger, our screens. So thanks, Sandra, for already striking out so many important points about gender and mobility. As I mentioned before, I work for the think tank IRADS Lab and leading the project Move Mobility. And our domain is data-driven mobility and mobility data. And here we came to realize that there's a considerable disbalance. There's an unequal data situation on mobility demands and the mobility behavior of women and men. So we talk about the gender-specific data gap or even shorter mobility data gap. And the thing is that mobility is often not equally accessible and usable for everyone. This is usually due to the fact that there is little or very insufficient data collected and used for mobility planning. As a rule, there's no differentiation is made according to gender, age, social situation. So in mobility, therefore, it's often designed for a very stereotypical passenger, which is usually male, mid-30s, commuting alone to work on weekdays and during the rush hour. So that's the mobility data gap. And the problem about it is, and I've already seen that in the chat, there was a person talking about an accident that she had. And it's an often quoted but very striking examples, crash test dummies. Male bodies, they were developed in the 60s and 70s. So cars ever since have been optimized to make driving safer for male bodies, not for female bodies. So the data set here is very limited for women bodies, and it leads to a higher risk for women in while driving cars. Females are about 17% more likely to be killed in a car accident than a male occupant of the same age, which I find very striking. And another example, and I'm looking forward to hear from Nathan about this as well, is that shared mobility is a male thing. At least that's what the usage of data suggests. Between 60 and 75% of the users of car, motorcycles, and e-scooter sharing services are men. So that's not per se problematic, right? But the problem here is the algorithm. And with the help of this calculation process, the sharing providers usually optimize the number of vehicles waiting for customers at a given time. And the data is provided by the users themselves while each rental. And as long as predominantly men borrow those vehicles, the algorithm always optimizes the offers for them. So because of the data and the way of the algorithm, shared mobility becomes more and more attractive for one kind of person, which is male, risk and tech friendly, and urban usually. So to conclude, in order to develop a more inclusive and transportation service, it would be important to collect more gender specific data, as well as other data points that are important. So mobility data gap, the gender mobility data gap is a big topic of ours. And I will post you 2 articles that is on our website, Amit, which happen to be in English. But if you're generally interested in the topic, I'll also give you my LinkedIn, so you can contact me on this.
Please do so. And yeah, Nathan, would you like to comment on what Lena has explained, and also a question to you given, and what about the actions you have taken to address gender equity? Please, Nathan.
Thank you, Seda, and thank you to the European Technology Chamber for inviting Voi here to speak about this topic. Lena, you're spot on talking about the data gap. And as I said earlier, I'm from Voi Technology, and as a transport operator, more specifically a micromobility operator, we deliver 2 key things. We deliver shared e-bikes and shared electric scooters. And essentially our vision as an organization is trying to create cities for living by transforming the way people move around cities. But we obviously know that in order to do this, we need to cater for all people. And that of course includes women. So whether that's e-scooters, cycling, or any other form of other lightweight transportation, we know that we need to try and close that gender gap. So essentially, what have we done? And what I'd like to talk about is actually something which we've done recently and some of the actions we're going to take off the back of that research.
Please.
So we delivered a research last month in partnership with Women in Transport and JFG Comms. And essentially that looks at women's perceptions and experiences of shared e-scooters. The relevance of that, of course, is that e-scooters haven't been around for a very long time. So there are, of course, not as much data points to be able to look at. So it's really important for us to be able to take a step back, think about what are the issues facing women currently in regards to e-scooter usage or e-bikes, and then decide what are the steps we need to take in order to address those. So one of the first things we've done is we will be looking to pilot nighttime safety events. The research tells us that 90% of our riders are confident of riding e-scooters during the day, but that's far less at nighttime, with only 64%. And Sandra mentioned some of the differences in travel behaviours when it relates to men and women, particularly at nighttime. So for us, this is a key reason why we're taking forward nighttime safety events. Another area which we'll be looking to take forwards is launching the first ever gender safe parking standard. Again, the research which we commissioned tells us that docking stations or parking locations or hubs are a barrier to riding for women, driven in part by their location of the parking station. So 83% of women in our study felt that docking stations can be a barrier to basically or usage of any sort of micromobility. So what we're looking to do is to create a common standard for parking based on an agreed set of metrics that are mapped to what we understand to be areas that matter to women's safety. Sandra mentioned earlier some of the work happening in Vienna and the gender mainstreaming department, and there's lots to learn from the work Vienna have done, some of the recent research which the International Transport Forum have published around this. And the third thing we'll be looking at, and again, speaking to what Nina was talking about, is data. We will ensure that we continue to share data, and of course the research I'll share in the chat as well, around women's perceptions and the information which we're getting as we develop and deliver micromobility services. To date, statistics show that 30% of Voi riders in the UK are women, and of course that's not enough. And generally across Europe, we're looking at between, say, 25 to 28% of women are using e-scooters at the moment. Like I said, if we want to deliver our vision to create cities for living, to encourage more sustainable travel options, we need to address this barrier. And that's the reason why we're going to ensure that we will share as much data as possible to inform some decisions cities, governments and other operators are making. So therefore, in closing, we know that obviously micromobility offers a huge opportunity to drive change, and hopefully some of the actions which we're taking as an organisation will help deliver that.
Thank you, Nathan. And of course, we can please comment each other views. And otherwise, Petra, what about women in charge? What about the lessons learned, please?
Yeah, maybe in line with already what Lena and Nathan and also Sandra said. 8 years ago, I started this Women in Charge project because I saw also back then already a gender bias, basically. I think that now it's more mainstream that we all realize that electric vehicles are one means to be mobile in a cleaner way, in a more sustainable way, because we need to shift away from burning petrol and diesel for our mobility. And so when I started 8 years ago, it was really the case that you barely saw women using electric vehicles. In 2014, there were very, very few electric vehicles on the roads. And if you saw something, it was usually men driving them, or it was sometimes couples and the men were driving the cars, the women were just on the co-pilot seats. And I think this is something which doesn't work, because if you want to have something mainstream, you can't have half of the population excluded from using a certain technology which we want to have, where we agree on that it's more useful to use it now than staying with the old things. Back then, also you could notice that what Sandra also mentioned, there is this pay gap. And of course, because electric vehicles, I mean, whatever technology is new is always more expensive. Electric vehicles were more expensive, are still more expensive. And if then women can't afford these cars, then also women, I mean, other women won't see women as role models in these cars, which means that it's like a vicious circle, right? I mean, it means that you have a certain set of the population, which used to be male, buying these cars, using these cars, being there on the roads, and then you have the other part of the population, and they are basically excluded from all this. Also, I mean, if you look at the type of cars people buy, then it's often, I mean, women tend to buy smaller cars. However, there's something interesting, and that was the reason why I started my project. If you look on average in Germany and European countries, women take on average more often the decision which car is bought. Single people all buy it, I mean, buy whatever they want, but in families, it's often the females who decide about the purchase of a car. This is why I think that if it's electric vehicles or whatever, we need to address this. I mean, if women are convinced that this is a good thing, then it's more likely that everyone will use it, also the men, right? No matter who. And I think this was also my idea back then, to have a project which includes everyone. And what I noticed is then that if you show it to people on a that it's working, that it's something which everyone can use, where you basically take away, you avoid that people are afraid of new technology. I think that's important then, to make it really that everyone is using it, men, women, older people, younger people, because we also see the same difference with women and men. We often see also with younger and older people, right? We see this, that educated people versus not so educated people. And I think this is something where we should really look at. And I think that's important to show then, like with electric vehicles, that it's something everyone can use. Nowadays, it's getting now better for electric vehicles. For example, now also the media is not so much against it anymore, because we had for years this mainstream media always telling everyone, oh, it's not working and it's still in the experimental phase or whatever. So my lesson learned was now that if also there's more people using it, more people as role models, and then if this is also transported in the media I think plays a very, very huge role. The media and peer groups. I mean, what does your environment do? If you have people around you who use something, who are also aware of a certain problem, and show you that it's not a problem at all, right? I mean, that you can use an electric vehicle, that you can use an autonomous car, that you can use an electric scooter, that you can use whatever, the charging station. And this was something which I found very interesting, that it's getting better, but also my lesson learned was it takes several years to change the mindset of people. And it's a continuous process.
Yeah, the most difficult part of this equity is, I think, changing the mindsets. That is what I see indeed. And so, what about the progress over the past decades, Sandra? Do you see? Oh, we cannot hear you, Sandra. I don't know for what reason, but would you like to check connection? So while we continue with with Nathan, maybe Nathan, while Sandra is checking her, maybe you need to leave audio and connect audio again, Sandra. I don't know why this happened, but it seems you have already connection with your microphone, and you are in the speaking mode, but maybe Asmat can also check, or Bhagwan, the connection of Sandra. So Nathan, there was a question. Maybe I missed that part, but how to use scooters wearing high heels? That's really a big question to me too, because I see ladies are struggling with it.
Yes, I think the main thing when it comes to, be it wearing high heels or having a handbag, or even having maybe smaller hands, bigger hands. It doesn't really matter, like the difference in like what people wear or how they want to travel. I think the main thing when it comes to using an e-scooter, particularly when it comes to designing them, is making sure you involve as many different groups as possible in that conversation, so you can account for how to design things so that it can work for as many people as possible. So we've managed to do that for our V5, or what is called our Voyager 5 scooter, which essentially... So can you hear me?
Yes.
So the Voyager 5 scooter, for example, we've held a number of hackathons, roundtables, interviews, and so on. And essentially, we've reduced the size of the handlebars, accounting for the fact that men normally have a lot bigger hands and women slightly smaller hands. So it means that it's a lot easier to be able to turn the indicators and maneuver the scooter without it creating like any sort of further accidents or issues. So these are some of the ways in which you can think about design, and through engagement first, and then start to adjust your service or product accordingly.
Thank you, Nathan. And are you with us, Sandra? Can you hear us? And maybe we can also hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, great. Please,
Yay.
What about the progress over the past decades, Sandra? How you see it?
Well, it's slow. It's too slow. And I think one of the reasons is that we're so used to this transport system that we've lived with, where we have to adjust to the transport mode that is available. And it's a one size fits all. And that's how we've built our ecosystem, right? If you look at Google Maps, it's you can either take this mode or that mode or the other mode. Those are your choices. Or you can take the Uber app, or you can take the Voi app, or whatever. And here's a train, and this is how you use it. It's not really looking at how diverse we are as people. And that's one of the reasons why we love our cars so much, because with our car, we can just grab our keys and go. And we've got, our bottle of water in the car, and we've got our favorite radio station, and off we go. And even if we're stuck in traffic for hours every week, we still prefer the car because it offers a more personalized, a more convenient experience. So if we're talking about sustainability, we really need to talk about gender, and we need to talk about accessibility, because if we don't crack those issues, we're never going to have sustainable transport models, because we're still going to just love our car so much. And we said before that women are more likely to use public transport, for example, because of they're poorer and they can't afford a car. So we call that a captive audience or a captive user, because they don't have a choice in a way. But what happens once women do have a choice and they can afford a car? They're going to buy one because the transport system isn't set out to work for them. So we kind of got to preempt that. And we've obviously want to reduce the gender pay gap and make sure everyone gets equal pay. And then we also want to make sure people use sustainable transport modes. But if women don't feel safe, they're not going to use public transport at night, because it just doesn't work for them. So they're going to stick to using their car. And I think it's that kind of, we really require a massive sort of shift in thinking on how we consume transport and how do these ecosystems have to look like. Because at the end of the day, they should be a lot more user-friendly, and we have to stop just taking the status quo for granted, because I think personally, it's just not good enough. And we really have to demand more from transport service providers and from governments and from companies to deliver better services. And I think then the change is going to happen a lot quicker.
Thank you, Lena, Nathan, Petra, and Sandra. The framework conditions and strategy must be designed to ensure technical and organizational tasks to implement inclusive mobility. And earlier you mentioned, Nathan, that Voi published research to understand and learn from women's perception and experience in micro. In that research involved a number of experts who made up the gender equity commission. Maybe in the next question, you can please tell us a bit more about this approach. In addition, how have you ensured women's transport needs and experiences inform the development of e-scooter regulation and services, Nathan. And then I'll ask Petra if there are any specific mobility patterns or issues which have an impact on the required infrastructure, like charging infrastructure, and if there is some gender bias. And then I will ask Sandra, how can mobility as a service MaaS support making mobility more inclusive? And finally, Lena may answer, why do we still need women networks in the mobility sector, and what are they good for? And who wants to be the first to share any thoughts on these aspects now? Maybe this time with you, Nathan.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think the first sort of point to start with is all around intent. As Sandra said earlier in her keynote, transport is designed for men by men. So if we're going to change anything, there needs to be the intent to do so, particularly if we want to try and deliver cleaner, more sustainable cities. So what we've tried to do really to start with is partnerships, which is a core part of what we do at Voi. So we partner with an organization called Open Inclusion, which is a pan-disability age-inclusive organization, Women in Transport and JFG Comms, and they were the groups which helped us to commission and develop the research, which I spoke about a bit earlier. But also as part of that, the roundtables, we've held hackathons, interviews and surveys with over 1,000 people, which also includes women. And all of that has played a role in informing how our engineers and our policies and things which we do within the organization. Now, I think the key bit which you mentioned in terms of the Gender Equity Commission goes to what Sandra was mentioning earlier around speed and the fact that what we're doing so far is quite slow. And it's quite ironic, obviously, as a transport sector, it's all about making sure we get there on time, things are delivered on time and actually done to speed or at a speed which is done safely. So it's quite interesting on a topic like this, we are so slow to take forward the actions which are required to deliver change. Now, one of the things which we looked at as part of this research is, given that micromobility and e-scooters are so new, there's not lots of research out there compared to maybe other transport modes. So one way in which we felt we can try and sort of bridge that gap and speed things along a bit is by forming a Gender Equity Commission. Essentially, experts which are working in this area, doing this every day, day in, day out, thinking about how to improve transport for women in their day jobs, and could bring along their expertise as well as the research findings which we had to add to the research. So we found that's one way of essentially making sure there's no gaps in our research and that we're covering off all the bases, hopefully, as it relates to micromobility. And that Gender Equity Commission included the C40, International Transport Forum, Open Inclusion, Women in Transport, and many others. And we think that could potentially be a very interesting way of taking forward research in the future, particularly in areas which are understudied, such as micromobility. And then I think the last part you said is, how do we make sure that women are involved in sharing their experiences to inform the development of e-scooter regulation and services? I think the main bit is research such as this. It's important that it's shared with decision makers, but also has very, very clear recommendations and tangible and easy tangible recommendations, which can be done in the short term, medium term, and long term, so that things can start, get the ball rolling, really. And that's what we try to do with the research, which has over 10 recommendations, all of which have different timescales attached to them.
Good to hear, Nathan. And what about the infrastructure for charging, and if there is some gender bias, Petra?
Yes, as Sandra also pointed out already, the mobility pattern of women is currently still different. I mean, this is also because on average, of course, it's not the same for everyone, but on average, women tend to have different jobs. Women tend to have a different mobility pattern. They might bring the kids to daycare more often. They do more shopping. It's something where we can all discuss that it's not nice, not fair, whatever, 50%, everything should be shared 50-50, but it's not the case. So you will find more women at supermarkets. You will find more women in front of whatever daycare centers. Now, for supermarkets, of course, there is several supermarkets did install charging stations, but very often it's only one, right? And yeah, I mean, currently you still see this, that sometimes even then people just drive there to only charge. They don't even go into the supermarket. You can then find people online who are complaining, because then it's usually, I mean, it's actually then mostly male drivers sitting in their cars, just waiting for the car to be charged, and then they would go away. For this charging infrastructure, it was then also often very stupid, because the supermarkets, for example, only opened this during their opening hours, gave away the electricity for free for customers, but then it was often abused by people who were just charging. And now it's a little bit better, because I think the idea would be much better to say, okay, people have to pay, but you leave it then open 24/7, because then those people who are only interested in charging can just put their car there. Whereas the other people, who are probably on average more often females, could then really use it while they do their shopping for groceries, and then they can leave. Now, this is one thing, because supermarkets actually are quite nice, because it's a public space, and it's really a public space. You have people coming and leaving. If you have a public space, Nathan, I think I mentioned this already, where people drop off the e-scooters, right? This can be then a remote site. You will not put such space spots right in the best place where there are people around. And this is something the same with charging stations. If you look at them at the highways, in the beginning, the charging stations were put really at the very end of these places, so that they wouldn't disrupt the normal parking procedures. But that means you are in a remote site, you have to wait there, because it does take longer than just filling up the car at a petrol station. And it meant that potentially at night, for example, it's a dark space, it's in a remote place, and then women tend to be more afraid of being robbed or something like this, or being raped, because it's something which I mean, women tend to be more afraid of darker sides than men. And it's also something you can then again probably also say, it's not only women, probably it's also elderly people, it's probably also weaker people. Whoever is weaker than an average person on the street might feel uncomfortable to be in a spot where you feel really alone, lonely, like also with the autonomous buses, what Sandra mentioned. If you are in a spot where you can maybe even potentially call for help, but if you call with your mobile phone, it will take 10 minutes, 20 minutes until somebody else will come to you and can potentially rescue you, and that might be too late. So I think, yes, we need a different infrastructure because of the different way males and females move at the moment. And we need also we need to take into account the feeling of people. I mean, how do people feel in a certain spot? What makes you uncomfortable? Where are you afraid? Because if you are afraid in a spot, you will try to avoid it. On the other hand, you have then also because of course you could charge also cars at your working place, but that's again something, or of course it's then what kind of companies do offer this option, right? I mean, who has the option at the moment to charge the car at the company? And that's often technology companies, that's really often bigger companies, which means also that you have a bias, because that's then maybe IT companies or whatever. And again, the staff there will be mostly male, which means that then also this charging station is more available for male people. Now, of course, the interesting thing is with the home office thing with Corona, everything is a little bit screwed up now, right? I mean, maybe this can have one impact on that side, that maybe certain patterns, which used to be the case until now, can be changed in the next years. So it will be interesting probably to see this, but I think there needs to be also some action, and it needs to be, like Sandra mentioned, people should think about, okay, when they plan the future infrastructure, what makes sense and how does it need to be?
Thank you, Petra. And Sandra, what about mobility as a service to support mobility, making it more inclusive?
Well, can you hear me? I'm paranoid now. You can't hear me.
Yes.
Okay. Well, the thing about mobility as a service is that we're trying to get mobility out of this one-size-fits-all system and make it more user-friendly. so that at the end of the day, it's not about what transport mode am I going to take to get from A to B to C, but it's about what are my personal needs. So, for example, I live with reduced mobility, so I can walk, but I don't walk very well. So there's certain transport modes that I can't take, and there are others that I can take. But I have to really plan my trips very, very carefully every time I do a trip. And as a lot of people with disabilities experience, we can't travel spontaneously. It's really, really hard, because we have to book assistants, or we have to make sure someone can accompany us, or we have to sort of really plan ahead. And that's a big problem, and that prevents us from making a lot of trips where we end up just staying at home because it's too hard, or we just couldn't do the trip spontaneously. So what Mobility as a Service wants to do in these cases is show you, well, you can do this trip with your specific needs. This is how your trip looks like. So if I access a Mobility as a Service application and I say, well, I want to go from Bristol to London on Thursday, then I will get a trip chain that is suitable to my needs. And that might look completely different to the trip chain that someone else has shown, because the technology can adapt around our needs. And we don't have to do it the other way around. We shouldn't have to adapt to the technology that is there, or to the transport mode that is there. And so what we're trying to do with Mobility as a Service is replicating that feeling of convenience of having the car keys in your pocket, and having that spontaneity and that ease of use. And that can only come with providing extreme user friendliness and being really focused on the user needs. And that's, I think, where Mobility as a Service is going to excel. We already see that with the projects that we're doing, because all our Mobility as a Service projects look completely different. The Leicester City Council, or we're doing paratransit in the US, we're doing DRT in Japan. They're all Mobility as a Service. They're all completely different because they adjust to the local requirements of the community. And I think that's where Mobility as a Service can really shine.
I'm more optimistic than before. Thank you, Sandra. And Lena, why do we still need women networks in the mobility industry? What are they good for?
We need them for many reasons. I think by the end of the day, it comes down to people and our perspectives, and we can try to be someone else and try to take in other people's needs. But yeah, we're still people, and cities were built from men for men. It's not that they had a bad intention in mind, right? They didn't plan on making cities less suitable for women or for children or people with disabilities. They were planning the city and our transportation system in a way that they thought that was right and suitable for everyone. But it turned out the everyone, or the suitable, is more for themselves. And they just don't know how it is to travel in a woman's shoes around town. And I give you an example here. So the standard average of walking speed is 5 kilometers per hour. And this standard is used everywhere around the world in city and transportation planning, and also in many apps. For example, in Google Maps, when you have a navigation, usually they use this standard of 5 kilometers per hour. And studies and field tests show that many women walk slower than men on average. So they walk on average 3.5 kilometers per hour. So that's a difference, and women have less accessibility because of that than men in cities. And this standard is not really questioned, and it's at the moment used for planning the 15-minute city. It's a very popular concept at the moment that is used in Paris and many other cities around the world. It's a beautiful concept, but also here we use old standards that don't take other perspectives into account. And I totally agree from what one of the participants wrote in the chat. It seems like we're still in the phase of realizing our inequalities and our problems, but we are not really tackling them yet. And in the European traffic and transport sector, the proportion of women is only 22% in 2019, according to the European Commission. So in order to have more inclusive city and transportation planning, it just needs more women in mobility and more women in leading positions, because we already bring as persons a different perspective to the table. And this is also why we founded our own network for women in tech and mobility data. It's called Women for Data-Driven Mobility. And it's a network especially for those research projects in the initiative mFund from the German Federal Ministry of Digital and Transport. And we bring together women from science, from business, from politics and civil society, from completely different areas of mobility, and also women that would usually not say that they work in mobility. For example, people that work in data science. And we want to offer those participants a platform for professional exchange, but we also want to promote to the public opinion and perception that women are high performers and high potentials in the mobility sector. And I really wish that we wouldn't even need to have female and women networks, but in my daily work, and I think you have that probably too, I see that there is still the necessity. We also organize one or even 2 events a month in the domain of mobility data, and it's really a scarcity to find women for panels and keynotes, even though it's so important. And oftentimes when we ask women, request them for the keynote, they say, I would feel more comfortable if my colleague could fill in, my male colleague could fill in and do the presentation. So that's the reason why women networks are still important, that we support each other. And also that there are various different kinds of networks, like the Women in Mobility, Women in Transportation, also Women in Charge. I think they are all needed for many years to come.
Now I understand better why we need women networks more. Thank you, Lena. I didn't know before those topics, but now I understand very well. And about the examples, advices, and responsibilities in the remaining 10 minutes, maybe 2 to maximum 3 minutes per panelist. What about the future, Petra? Will you please give a bit about your expectations of what will happen in the next maybe 5 to 15 years? And then Sandra, how can we ensure we move away from retrofitting for specific user needs to inclusive design from the start? And then why it isn't just about making mobility infrastructure and cities more female friendly, but in general to make mobility more inclusive? And Nathan, I'll ask you to give an example of universal design from a gender lens perspective, and what it tangibly means to bring women on board in shaping transport services. Bundling with another question shortly, please, Nathan. What should cities do to ensure equal city access, rights and conditions for all? What role can gender play in that, Nathan? And maybe we can start with you, Petra, this time. What about the future? For maybe 2 to 3 minutes maximum. Thank you.
Yes. So maybe for mobility in general, I think a lot of things will change in the next few years already, and I think many people are maybe not really even aware how many things have to change in the next 5 to 15 years, I would say, because first of all, we have different trends. We will see the technological unemployment, which will lead to a very huge shift also job-wise, and which can have a huge impact also on the gender pay gap. Because I think that a lot of people are not really aware. I mean, if we have now a lot of jobs which will disappear in the next years, this means also that certain jobs which were or are and were very well paid until now will disappear. And that means also that a part of the money will go to different areas, right? I mean, to just say, I mean, a nurse or something like this can't be replaced as easily as a lawyer. I mean, there might be people who are consultants or whatever who will disappear because it's simply something which some software can do in a better way. And I think this technological unemployment will disrupt the job market. And this will then also have basically an impact on the salaries. It will have an impact also on the mobility, because then suddenly, I mean, we need new jobs, and people will move differently. I mean, somebody who is not needed anymore has a different mobility need. You will have certain jobs will disappear where maybe people need to travel. We saw this already now with Corona, that certain things can be done in home offices. If a company allows people to stay in home offices, this means also that maybe the company car will disappear, because why should a company then give the company car to that person? And that was all very often male people. And so there will be a disruption in that area. And then, of course, we see also different trends. We have aging population. We have more obese people. These people have also different demands. These people need different types of mobility. And this means also that we have a broader sense of, okay, people want to live still a healthier life. So we want cleaner air. The cities will have more restrictions when it comes to which cars or which types of vehicles, whatever, are allowed to go into different areas. And this means that as a whole, I think we will see a huge disruption in the mobility market in the next 5 to 15 years.
Great, thank you, Petra. And Sandra, what about retrofitting or doing it from scratch? Maybe in a nutshell.
Yeah, just really quick. I think there was someone in the Carolyn really sort of answered that in the chat already. I mean, retrofitting is obviously, it's frustrating, it's costly. So why don't we start with a more inclusive approach right from the beginning? And we had a sort of little discussion in the chat there, and Carolyn said it is probably a mixture of stricter regulation and more structural campaigns to shift mindsets and behaviors. And I think that really sort of nails it. We do need, as I said before, we do need the regulation that stipulates certain requirements in terms of accessibility, inclusiveness, and sustainability. But then also we don't want to stifle innovation. Obviously, we can't over-regulate. That's not the answer either. So we really have to find that middle ground of keeping the industry motivated to achieve better standards, because at the end of the day, it means better business for everyone. If you can include a larger user group, it means you make more business, right? Exclusiveness is not always a good business decision. I think that sort of mind shift needs to happen.
That is the key. I agree with you fully, Sandra. Mind shift we need. And Lena, why isn't it just about making mobility the infrastructure and cities more female friendly, but in general to make mobility more inclusive? What is the difference? What should we do in a nutshell, please?
I'll keep it short as well. So as Sandra already showed in her presentation, women are moving greener because they use more economically friendly modes of transportation. They use more multimodal ways, and they are with children a lot more often. So if we already in city planning and mobility service providers would optimize their products more for women, it would also be a benefit for people with disabilities. And the second point here is we see women also as like the spear front and the forerunners who are making the whole mobility sector more inclusive, because once people have understood, okay, there's a difference between male and female mobility, people are also more likely to understand that there is even more to it, that people with disabilities, people who lost their vision or have a problem with it, or have a wheelchair, problems with their vision, that there is so much more that people should be considered for in more inclusive mobility. So we see women here as opening up the way, paving the way, so to say.
Yeah, you're doing great. And maybe we can get an example from Nathan now, a universal one, please, and what it tangibly means to bring women on board. And as well, can you please bundle it? What should cities do to ensure equal access rights and conditions for all and gender role for it? Thank you, please, Nathan.
Yes, I'll keep this short. So in terms of universal design, essentially for our part, our key product being electric scooters and electric bikes. So for us, it's key that we engage with as many user groups as possible. So earlier I mentioned some of the hackathons or different research methods we've taken. And that's actually led to our V5 scooter having slightly adjusted smaller handlebars, for example. But this is not just we do this once and then we stop there. This has to be an iterative approach over time, and you constantly need to keep designing and improving the service where possible. So our V3 scooter, for example, included a hook on it based on user feedback, and then our V4 scooter had further changes and so on. So universal design, essentially means trying to take into consideration as many different perspectives as possible and trying to make sure you design for them. Particularly in the case of micromobility. And in terms of what can cities do, so we've published our roadmap towards more inclusive micromobility, and it focuses on three key areas or three key steps. The first one is to try and provide access to all, which, so from a city perspective, trying to provide access to all for transport or any service is very important. The second one being a tailored service, so making sure that everyone can use that and tailoring services for different needs. And the last one is meaningful involvement, essentially ensuring that people feel like their involvement in any ideas taken forwards is actually meaningful, and it's not just a one-stop thing. It's something which they can come back to and actually held cities and operators like ourselves are held to account to deliver on.
Thank you, Lena, Nathan, Petra, and then Sandra for your contributions. It's not an easy topic, and we had a very precise and tangible discussion, so I hope I haven't promised too much at my introduction. In the end, we must solve a global challenge and therefore need the local, regional, national, and global alliances to create awareness and foster collaboration to establish all the required inclusive mobility. We got already questions from our listeners and commented and answered all, and time has just flown by, and we are almost at the end of our talk. Lena, Nathan, Petra, and Sandra, I know you are all, and I could have spoken much longer since you are passionate about this topic. Today, again, we have learned that we need sustainable and smart product and service approaches and openness to create and operate accepted and holistic human-centric design of mobility that could be integrated into higher systems. And we need global players like you, Lena, Nathan, Petra, and Sandra. So let me quickly say thanks to Bernd, and a big thank to you, Sandra, also for your keynote speech, and thanks to you, Lena, Nathan, and Petra, for having shared your views in such a succinct and structured way, not all tools and insights on this topic itself and beyond, which EUTech will honor our panelists in a specific way. Now our chamber will provide you the 3 certificates. Let's give floor to Jörg Tuchen, who is chair of the Climate Action Commission at EUTech Chamber and will present the certificates.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
Perfect. And you can also see my screen, right?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. That's a good start. So thank you very much for handing over to me, but more importantly, thank you very much to you, dear speakers and panelists, for being here with us, for sharing your perspectives, your experiences, and for engaging into such a lively discussion, which I had the pleasure to listen to at least towards the end. I was really highly fascinating, great perspectives. And I have the pleasure to hand over now a tree certificate to each of you. EUTech is doing that for all the more than 200 webinars per year, handing over a tree certificate for speakers and panelists. And why is that such a special pleasure to me to hand over a tree certificate? Well, I am the chair of the Climate Action Commission at EUTech, and in my real job, so to say, I'm the managing director of GoBlue Now, and we are a climate consulting company. We are supporting organizations in their transition towards a 1.5 degree compatible future, transforming their processes, their businesses, in order to emit less and less CO2. in both roles, for both roles, trees are, very, very relevant. So thank you again. And now I actually do it and hand over the tree certificates to Nathan Ashley. Thank you very much, Nathan, as well as to Lena Rickenberg. Thank you, Lena, for being here. Of course, I will send those tree certificates to you immediately after the webinar. And I would also like to thank Petra, Sandra, Bernd, who are part of the EUTech crowd, so to say, and due to that fact do not receive a tree certificate. Actually, Petra would have been able to plaster her whole house probably with tree certificates if she would receive them. But nevertheless, thank you all as well. And having said that, Sarah, handing back to you, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you all,
Thank you.
especially for the last part of your explanation. Now it is clear for all. Thank you very much, Jörg. And finally, thanks to you, dear audience, for your time and great questions. Please do get in touch with us for any questions, thoughts, and ideas that have arisen from this talk. Whether or not, there are many ways to get to know us and our work better. One is by participating on our monthly events like this one today, to connect with other experts and to evaluate the solution space for a system change in mobility. See you next time. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Lena, Anatan, Petra, Sandra, Bernd. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
No, Bernd, I appreciate it. Thank you again. Bye.
Thank you again, Seda. Have a great